That young recruit was about to learn the hardest lesson of his career, and it wouldn't come from a drill sergeant, but from the woman polishing his general's boots. Her name was Sarah, though few people on the base even knew that much. To most, she was just a quiet shadow, a part of the background scenery in the command wing of Fort Bragg. She was in her late 50s, a black woman with streaks of gray at her temples and a stillness about her that most people mistook for meekness. Her official title was General's Orderly, a civilian position that was really just a glorified name for a cleaner and all-around helper. She kept the 4-star General's suite of offices immaculate, brewed his coffee exactly how he liked it, and moved with a silent efficiency that made her practically invisible. And that's exactly how she seemed to prefer it. She'd been there for 3 years, a ghost in government-issued work clothes. She'd arrived before the sun came up, her footsteps making no sound on the polished linoleum floors. She knew the building's secrets, which floorboard creaked, which door hinge needed oiling. Sarah's world was one of quiet observation. From her unseen corner, she saw everything. She saw ambitious colonels sweat before a meeting with the general. She saw young lieutenants trying to hide their nerves. And she saw the endless parade of new recruits assigned to messenger duty, puffed up with the pride of being so close to the center of power, which brought her to Specialist Miller. Kyle Miller was, in the base's parlance, a high-speed, low-drag kind of soldier. 21 years old, fresh out of basic and advanced training with top marks, he looked like he was grown in a lab to be on an Army recruitment poster. He was tall, athletic, with a chiseled jaw and a confidence that bordered on arrogance. He'd been assigned to the command wing for a month, and in that time, he made it his mission to ensure everyone knew just how promising his future was. He walked the halls with a swagger, his perfectly bloused boots thudding with an importance only he could hear. And from day one, he treated Sarah like she was a piece of furniture. Not with outright hostility at first. It was worse. He didn't even see her. He'd walk past her without a glance and track mud across her freshly mopped floors without a word of apology. The first time it became personal, it was subtle. Sarah had just finished polishing the wooden floor of the main corridor until it shone like dark water. She was gathering her supplies when Miller came striding down the hall, intentionally scuffing his boots, leaving a trail of dusty marks. He smirked as he passed her. "Gotta keep these floors ready for inspection, right?" he said, his voice dripping with condescension. Sarah didn't respond. She simply looked at the marks, then at him, her expression unreadable. She waited for him to disappear around the corner before slowly, methodically, repolishing the entire section. Her jaw muscle tightened for just a second, a flicker of something hard and ancient in her eyes. The second time was more direct. General Thompson was off base for the day, and the office was quiet. Sarah was carefully dusting the historical photos on the wall when Miller and 2 other young recruits came in, laughing loudly. Miller, seeing her, decided to put on a show for his friends. "Hey, Grandma," he called out, leaning against the doorframe. "You miss a spot." He pointed to a clean section of the wall. His friends snickered. Sarah stopped her work and turned to face him. She held his gaze for a long moment, the silence stretching out. Her stillness was unnerving. It was a look that seemed to peel back the layers of his bravado. Miller's smile faltered. He cleared his throat, suddenly uncomfortable. "Just making sure you're earning your paycheck," he stammered, before turning and quickly walking away. But it was the third incident that set the stage. A young private, barely 18, had accidentally spilled a tray of coffee mugs just outside the general's main office. Miller descended on the kid like a hawk. "Are you serious?" he yelled. "You clumsy idiot." The young private was close to tears, fumbling with a mess. Sarah emerged from a supply closet. She didn't say a word. She walked past the furious Miller, knelt down beside the terrified private, and began picking up the largest pieces of broken mug. Her hands moved with a practiced calm, but they weren't the hands of a cleaner. They were scarred, with a web of thin white lines across the knuckles, and tough with calluses that told a different story. She looked at the young private and gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod of reassurance. Miller, seeing his audience's attention shift, grew even angrier. "What's this?" he sneered. The cleanup crew sticking together? Get out of here, old lady. This is military business. Sarah stood up slowly. She faced Miller directly, and for the first time, she spoke to him. Her voice was quiet and carried a weight that made the air feel heavy. Everyone makes mistakes, specialist. That was all. But the way she said it, as a statement of fact, it cut through his anger. Kyle Miller, a man who thought he knew everything, had absolutely no idea how to respond. He just stood there as Sarah gave the young private another nod and walked away, disappearing back into the shadows. The incident with the spilled coffee didn't go unnoticed. Sergeant Major Evans, the general's senior enlisted advisor, had seen the whole thing from his office doorway. Evans was a man who had spent 30 years in the Army, and his eyes missed nothing. Something about Sarah's intervention didn't sit right with him. It wasn't just what she did. It was how she did it. When Miller had been yelling, Sarah hadn't flinched. She had assessed the situation, identified the person in distress, and moved to de-escalate. Her movements were economical, her posture centered. It was the kind of ingrained calm you saw in seasoned combat medics or special forces operators. It was utterly out of place for a civilian cleaner. That evening, Evans found an excuse to walk past Sarah as she was finishing her duties. "Appreciate you handling that situation with the private earlier," he said casually. Sarah simply nodded. Evans leaned against the wall. "You ever serve?" he asked. For the first time, a flicker of something unreadable crossed her face. "No, Sergeant Major," she said, her voice even. "Never had the honor." The answer was a polite dead end. But as she turned back to her work, Evans's eyes were drawn again to her calloused, scarred hands. He walked away with more questions than answers. Who was this woman? The tension in the command wing built over the next week. The annual inspection by General Thompson, a legendary four-star officer from the Pentagon, was imminent. Miller, desperate to make a good impression, became even more insufferable. The confrontation that sealed his fate happened the day before the inspection. A memo had come down with a last-minute schedule change. An officer tasked Miller with updating the main briefing room's whiteboard. Miller, seeing Sarah cleaning in the same room, saw another opportunity to assert his authority. "Hey," he said, snapping his fingers. "I need you to write this on the board. Make it neat." Sarah looked from the memo to his expectant face. She shook her head once. Miller's face flushed red. "Excuse me," he said, his voice rising. "I'm a specialist in the United States Army. I'm giving you a task." Sergeant Major Evans had just walked into the room. He stopped by the door, invisible to Miller, and watched. Sarah simply pointed to the whiteboard marker, then back to Miller. Her message was clear: you do it. "This is unbelievable," Miller said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. A complete lack of discipline. He took a step closer to her, his posture aggressive. "You work here for us. You will do what you're told." Evans was about to step in when Sarah held up one hand, a universal sign to stop. Then she picked up the marker, walked to the board, and in a flawless, military-style script, wrote the updated information. She capped the marker, placed it back on the tray, and turned to leave without a single glance at Miller. The room was silent. Miller was left standing there, completely undermined. She hadn't just done the task. She'd done it with a level of practice perfection he couldn't match. It was another piece of the puzzle that didn't fit, and Sergeant Major Evans, watching from the doorway, felt a shiver of certainty. This woman was no orderly. She was a ghost. The day of the inspection arrived with a tense, electric stillness. General Thompson was a living legend, a man who had led troops in every major conflict for the past 30 years. When he finally entered the command wing, the air itself seemed to snap to attention. He was a tall, imposing man with piercing blue eyes and a chest full of ribbons that told the story of a lifetime of service. Sergeant Major Evans escorted him, briefing him in low tones as they walked. Sarah was, as always, a silent presence in the background, ensuring everything was perfect. Specialist Miller was practically vibrating with nervous energy. This was his moment. He had positioned himself near the main briefing room, his uniform so sharply pressed it could have cut glass. He was determined to be seen by the legendary general. The inspection tour went smoothly. Finally, They arrived at the general's own office suite. The general surveyed the room, a rare look of satisfaction on his face. He ran a hand over his old oak desk. Not a speck of dust. "Exemplary, Sergeant Major," he said. Miller saw his opening. He stepped forward. "Specialist Miller, sir. We do our best to maintain the highest standards for you." General Thompson gave him a brief, dismissive glance before his eyes settled on Sarah, who was standing quietly by the door. The general offered her a small, respectful nod. But for Miller, this was an intolerable slight. Driven by a desperate need for recognition, he made his final, fatal error. "Sarah does a great job keeping this place spotless, sir," Miller said, his tone oozing false praise. "Especially for her age, she really is a hard worker." The words hung in the air, thick and poisonous. A physical silence fell over the room. "Sergeant Major," Evans froze. General Thompson's head slowly turned from Sarah to Miller. The professional look in his eyes vanished, replaced by something as cold and hard as chipped ice. He just stared at Miller, and under that silent, crushing weight, Miller's confident smile began to wither. The general's gaze then shifted back to Sarah. She was in the process of tidying some papers on a high shelf next to a window. To reach it, she had to roll up the sleeve of her work shirt just a few inches. A beam of afternoon sunlight lanced through the window, illuminating her forearm. And that's when he saw it. It was faded, the ink blurred by years and sun, but it was absolutely unmistakable. Tucked away on the inside of her forearm was a small tattoo. It wasn't a flower or a name. It was the emblem of the U.S. Army's 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta. The elite of the elite. Delta Force. The air in the room went from still to a complete vacuum. General Thompson's entire demeanor changed. The 4-star general, the living legend, suddenly looked like a young lieutenant in the presence of royalty. His back became straighter. His expression shifted from icy anger to a deep, solemn, and absolute respect. He took one deliberate step forward. His world had narrowed to the quiet, unassuming woman standing by the bookshelf. Then he did something that no one in that room had ever seen before. His hand didn't just rise. It snapped to his brow in a salute so crisp, so full of meaning, it echoed in the silent room like a gunshot. It wasn't the casual salute one gives a subordinate. It was the sharp, formal salute a soldier gives to a Medal of Honor recipient. It was a gesture of pure, unadulterated reverence. He held the salute, his eyes locked on Sarah, who had slowly lowered her arm. For the first time, the veil of invisibility she wore dropped away, and everyone in the room saw what the general saw. Not a cleaner, not an old woman, but a warrior. Specialist Miller's world tilted on its axis. A 4-star general saluting the cleaning lady? It made no sense. He looked around and saw his own confusion mirrored on the other faces in the room, but mixed with a dawning understanding. General Thompson held the salute for a full 3 seconds before crisply lowering his hand. He remained at the position of attention. He didn't speak to her. Instead, he turned his head slowly, his icy gaze locking on a Miller. "Specialist." The general's voice was dangerously quiet. "Do you have any idea who you've been speaking to?" Miller could only shake his head. "You see a cleaner," the general continued. "I see a hero who saved my life and the lives of 12 other men. You see an old woman. I see one of the finest soldiers this nation has ever produced." He took a step towards the stunned recruits. "Let me tell you a story about Mogadishu. October 1993. What you didn't see in the movie was her." He gestured with his head towards Sarah. "My chalk was pinned down, surrounded, taking heavy fire from RPKs, heavy machine guns that were tearing our cover to shreds. Our radio man was hit. Comms were down. We thought we were dead." The general's eyes were distant. Then, the fire on our most dangerous threat stopped. A figure emerged from the smoke, moving like a phantom. It was her. Command Sergeant Major Sarah Michaels. A collective gasp went through the room. She was part of a small Delta team providing sniper overwatch 2 blocks away. She saw our situation, broke protocol, and fought her way through those 2 blocks. Alone. She took out the machine gun nest, patched up our wounded, got our radio working, and coordinated our extraction. She turned the tide. He paused. You see this tattoo? He looked at Sarah's arm. That is earned in blood and sacrifice, and a courage that you, specialist, cannot even begin to comprehend. He turned his full attention back to Miller, whose face was now pale with terror and shame. You have spent a month disrespecting a living legend. You have a lot to learn about what a soldier truly is. The silence that followed was absolute. Slowly, as if moving through deep water, Miller walked forward until he stood in front of Sarah. His arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by the trembling uncertainty of a humbled boy. Tears welled in his eyes. He brought his heels together, his body snapping to the position of attention, and raised his hand in a clumsy salute. "Command, Sergeant Major," he choked out, his voice thick with emotion. I apologize. I'm so sorry." Sarah looked at him, and a hint of a gentle smile touched her lips. She returned his salute with a slight, graceful nod. Her quiet voice filled the room. "Honor isn't in the rank on your shoulders, son," she said. "It's in how you treat the person next to you. Remember that." Miller could only nod, tears streaming down his face. The next day, everything in the command wing had changed. Word had spread like wildfire. Recruits who used to walk past Sarah without a glance now straightened their backs and offered a respectful, "Morning, ma'am." Miller was a different man, quiet and thoughtful, assigned to the mess hall for a month to learn a lesson in humility. And Sarah, well, Sarah was still Sarah. She still arrived before dawn, still moved with a quiet efficiency. She was no longer invisible, but she sought no spotlight. Her heroism didn't need one. Sometimes, the greatest heroes aren't the ones in the headlines. They're the quiet professionals, the legends living among us, seeking no reward other than a job well done. They're the ones who remind us that true strength is often found in silence, and that the highest honor is earned not by what you can command, but by what you choose to protect. Here at War Stories, we believe in honoring these hidden heroes. So we want to ask you, who is the unsung hero in your life? Let us know in the comments below.